The knock came at 6:17 on a Tuesday evening. I remember because I was staring at the clock, wondering how I'd manage dinner for my son with nothing but half a box of stale cereal and some questionable milk in the fridge. That knock would change everything: my life as a struggling single father, my career, even how I saw myself. If you're watching this and feeling like you've hit rock bottom, trust me when I say that sometimes your miracle is just one knock away. Hit that like button if you've ever needed a second chance, and subscribe to follow my journey from broken to blessed. Rain pelted against the windows of our small mountain cabin as I trudged to the door. My 5-year-old son, Ethan, was sprawled on the living room floor, coloring with the few crayons that weren't broken, his small face pinched with concentration. The cabin, a family inheritance and our last refuge after the divorce and layoff, creaked under the assault of the storm. I opened the door to find a woman standing there, somehow immaculate despite the downpour. Sophia Jolly, though I didn't know her name then, stood on my porch with perfect posture, her caramel hair falling in waves around a face that managed to look both kind and formidable. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly child support payments, and carried a sleek leather portfolio. "Mr. Picard? Mason Picard?" Her voice was warm but authoritative. I nodded, suddenly aware of my 3-day stubble and the pasta sauce stain on my sweatshirt. "I'm Sophia Jolly, CEO of Summit Innovations. May I come in? I promise I'll only take 10 minutes of your time." Those 10 minutes stretched into 3 hours, and by the end of it, my life had a completely different trajectory. I'd been a software engineer before everything fell apart. My wife left when Ethan was barely 2, claiming she never signed up to be a mother, and wanted to find herself in Europe. 6 months later, my company downsized, and I was cut loose with a pathetic severance package. We'd been surviving on freelance work I could find online, but those gigs were becoming scarcer, and the isolation of our mountain home was starting to feel less like peace and more like exile. "I've seen your work," Sophia said, settling onto our worn couch and opening her portfolio. Ethan had abandoned his coloring to stare at our visitor, fascinated by this polished stranger. "The Nexus project you contributed to 3 years ago. The coding was brilliant." I blinked in surprise. The Nexus project had been my proudest achievement, but it had been buried under corporate branding. "How did you know I worked on that?" Sophia smiled, a flash of warmth in her professional demeanor. "I make it my business to find talent, Mr. Picard. Especially when it's being wasted." She explained that Summit Innovations was developing a revolutionary platform for sustainable energy management, and they needed someone with exactly my skill set. The salary she mentioned made me choke on the lukewarm coffee I'd hastily offered her. "But I've been out of the industry for almost 2 years, I protested. "And I have Ethan. I can't relocate or work crazy hours." "We offer remote work with flexible scheduling," she countered smoothly. "And we have excellent benefits, including childcare assistance. All I need is your commitment to excellence." As she spoke, Ethan had inched closer, eventually settling beside her on the couch. To my surprise, Sophia paused her business pitch to ask him about his drawing. When he shyly showed her the superhero he'd created, Daddy Man, who could fix anything and make the best pancakes, her professional mask slipped, revealing a genuine smile. "Your daddy sounds pretty special," she told him seriously. "Special people deserve special opportunities." That moment, her recognition of not just my professional value but my worth as a father, was what convinced me to take the chance. The storm had intensified outside, making it unsafe for her to drive back down the mountain. Embarrassed by our empty fridge, I admitted we had nothing for dinner. Without missing a beat, Sophia pulled out her phone, somehow found a delivery service willing to brave the weather, and ordered enough food to last us days. As we ate pizza by candlelight, the power had predictably gone out. She told us about growing up poor with a single mother, working her way through college, and building her company from nothing. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said, helping Ethan wipe tomato sauce from his chin. Sometimes they just need someone to knock on their door. That night changed everything. Within a week, I had signed a contract with Summit Innovations. Within a month, our financial situation had stabilized. By the 6-month mark, Ethan and I had moved to a better home closer to town, though still nestled in the mountains we'd grown to love. But the journey wasn't smooth. My skills were rusty, and the learning curve was steep. There were nights I stayed up until dawn, struggling with code while Ethan slept, wondering if I was in over my head. The first project I led nearly failed when I miscalculated a critical algorithm. I was ready to resign before I could be fired. Sophia wouldn't hear of it. "You don't climb a mountain by walking straight up," she told me during a tense video call. "You zigzag. You rest. Sometimes you slide back a bit. But you keep going." Her faith in me was unwavering, even when mine faltered. She assigned me a mentor, adjusted deadlines when Ethan got sick with pneumonia, and once even flew in personally when a project crisis coincided with Ethan's school play. She sat beside me in the elementary school auditorium, applauding wildly when my son delivered his one line as tree number 3. "Business is important," she whispered to me, "but moments like these are irreplaceable." As months turned into a year, I noticed changes in myself. The defeated man who had opened the door that rainy night was disappearing. I stood straighter. I smiled more. I had energy to play with Ethan instead of just surviving each day. When his teacher commented on the positive change in him, I realized how much my own despair had been affecting my son. The most unexpected change came in my relationship with Sophia. What began as a professional connection evolved into friendship. She was brilliant, driven, and surprisingly funny once you broke through her executive exterior. She taught me about business strategy and fine wine. I introduced her to the joys of Saturday morning cartoons and building blanket forts. Ethan adored her. "Is Miss Sophia your girlfriend?" he asked one evening after she joined us for dinner. "She's my boss," I corrected him, ignoring the strange flutter in my chest. "Can't she be both?" he asked with a child's innocent logic. The question lingered in my mind. Sophia and I had maintained professional boundaries, despite the friendship that had grown between us. She was, after all, the CEO of a rapidly growing company, and I was a mid-level engineer with a complicated life. But there were moments, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted just a second too long, that made me wonder. The true test of our bond came 18 months after that first knock, when Summit Innovations faced a crisis. A competitor claimed we had stolen their intellectual property, the very project I had been leading. The accusation was false, but the legal battle threatened to bankrupt the company. Investors pulled out, employees began jumping ship, and the stress took a visible toll on Sophia. I found her late one night in her office, surrounded by legal documents, her usual composure cracked. "I might lose everything," she admitted, vulnerability showing through her fatigue. "Everything I've built." That night, it was my turn to be the strong one. I stayed with her, reviewing documents, finding the evidence we needed to prove our innovation was original. When she finally fell asleep on the office couch, I covered her with my jacket and kept working. The next morning, bleary-eyed but determined, we found the breakthrough we needed, a timestamp on an early development server that proved our code predated the competitor's patent filing. The case was dismissed 2 weeks later. The evening after the ruling, Sophia came to our home unannounced. Ethan was already asleep, and I was sitting on the porch, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. "You saved my company," she said, sitting beside me. "You saved us first," I replied simply. The kiss that followed felt inevitable, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. The brilliant, unstoppable force that had swept into our lives that rainy night was now a permanent part of them. One autumn morning, about 2 years after Sophia first knocked on our door, I received a call that sent ice through my veins. Ethan's school principal informed me that my ex-wife had shown up, demanding to see her son. After years of complete silence, no calls, no cards, not even child support, she had suddenly reappeared, claiming she wanted to reconnect with the child she'd abandoned. I left work immediately, my hands shaking as I drove to the school. Sophia called as I was parking. "I just heard," she said, her voice tight with concern. "I'm on my way." The principal had refused to release Ethan to his mother without my consent, but allowed a brief supervised visit in her office. When I arrived, I found my son sitting stiffly beside a woman who looked like a glossier version of the one who'd left us. Designer clothes, expensive highlights, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mason," she said, standing to greet me with an air of casual confidence that made my blood boil. "You're looking well. What are you doing here, Claire?" I asked, moving to Ethan's side. He pressed against me immediately, his small body tense. "I've been doing some soul-searching," she said, as if explaining a delayed flight rather than a 3-year absence from her child's life. "I realize I made a mistake. I want to be part of Ethan's life again." Before I could respond, Sophia appeared in the doorway, somehow managing to look both perfectly composed and ready for battle. She introduced herself to Claire with a firm handshake and a smile that could cut glass. "I understand you're interested in reconnecting with Ethan," Sophia said pleasantly. "That's quite a change of heart after 3 years of no contact." Claire's eyes narrowed as she assessed Sophia, clearly trying to determine what role this polished woman played in our lives. "This is a family matter," she said dismissively. "Sophia is family," Ethan piped up unexpectedly, his voice small but determined. "She comes to my baseball games and helps with my science projects and makes Dad laugh again." The simple truth in my son's words brought tears to my eyes. Claire looked stunned, then angry. She launched into a speech about her rights as a mother, about how she'd found herself in Europe, about how she was ready to be a mother now. Through it all, Sophia remained calm, occasionally asking pointed questions about Claire's plans for involvement, her current living situation, a studio apartment in the city, unsuitable for a child, and her understanding of Ethan's current life, minimal at best. When Claire finally ran out of steam, Sophia suggested that any reintroduction should be gradual and on Ethan's terms. She recommended a family therapist who specialized in reunification cases and suggested a schedule of short, supervised visits that could increase over time if things went well. "You've clearly thought this through," Claire said, her tone suggesting this wasn't a compliment. "Ethan's well-being is our priority," Sophia replied simply, her hand finding mine and squeezing gently. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Sophia and I sat on our porch swing, watching the stars appear over the mountains. "Thank you for today," I said, still processing the emotional whiplash of Claire's sudden reappearance. Sophia turned to me, her expression serious. "Mason, I need you to know something. I will never try to replace Ethan's mother. That's not my place. But I will always, always fight for what's best for him, and for you." I pulled her close, overwhelmed by the fierce protectiveness of this woman who had walked into our broken lives and helped us rebuild. "You know what Ethan said was true, right? You are family. The family we chose." The months that followed were challenging. Claire's interest waxed and waned. She'd show up enthusiastically for a few visits, then disappear for weeks without explanation. Each time, Ethan would retreat into himself, the old insecurities resurfacing. Sophia remained our rock, never bad-mouthing Claire but always steady in her support. 6 months into this new arrangement, Claire arrived for a scheduled visit with news. She'd met someone, a businessman with interests in Asia. They were moving to Singapore the following month. "I'll visit when I can," she promised Ethan, who nodded with the weary acceptance of a child who had learned not to expect too much. After she left, I found my son sitting on his bedroom floor, methodically arranging his collection of model airplanes. "You okay, buddy?" I asked, sitting beside him. He shrugged, not looking up. "Mom's leaving again." "Yes," I said, not sugarcoating it. "She is." "That's okay," he said after a moment. "We have Sophia now." And Sophia doesn't leave. The simple truth of his statement hit me like a revelation. Through all our ups and downs, through company crises and childhood illnesses, through late nights and early mornings, Sophia had never wavered. She had become the constant in our lives that Claire never could be. That night, after Ethan was asleep, I found Sophia working in our home office, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed quarterly reports. I stood in the doorway, watching her, this extraordinary woman who had knocked on my door during a storm and changed everything. "Marry me," I said, the words tumbling out before I could overthink them. She looked up, startled, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. "What?" "Marry me," I repeated, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair. "Not someday, not eventually. Soon. I don't have a ring yet, and this isn't how I plan to do this, but—" "Yes," she interrupted, her eyes shining. "Yes, Mason Picard. I will marry you." The wedding was small and perfect, held in the garden of our mountain home the following spring. Ethan stood proudly as my best man, beaming as he handed over the rings. Claire sent a gift from Singapore but didn't attend, a fact that bothered me less than I would have expected. As Sophia and I exchanged vows under an arch of wildflowers, with the mountains we both loved standing witness, I marveled at how life can change. 3 years earlier, I had been a broken man, barely surviving each day. Now I stood tall, surrounded by love, purpose, and possibility. At the reception, Sophia clinked her glass for attention, her face radiant with happiness. "I want to share something with all of you," she said, her voice carrying across our gathered friends and family. 3 years ago, I was driving through these mountains, lost in a storm. I was supposed to be meeting a potential investor, but my GPS failed, and I ended up on a remote road I'd never seen before. This was news to me. She'd never mentioned getting lost that night. I saw a light through the trees, this cabin, and decided to ask for directions. But when the door opened, and I saw Mason standing there, something told me I was exactly where I needed to be. She turned to me, her eyes shining. I made up a story about seeking him out for his coding skills. The truth is, I had never heard of him before that night. I just knew, somehow, that this man and his son were important. That we were meant to find each other. Gasps and murmurs rippled through our guests. I stared at her, stunned. "You mean?" "Our meeting was completely random," she confirmed, smiling at my shock. "Or fate, if you believe in such things. I looked you up on my phone while you were making coffee, found your work history, and improvised from there." "But the job offer? The company?" "Oh, those were real. And you were genuinely qualified. I just hadn't been specifically looking for you." She squeezed my hand. "Sometimes the best things in life find us when we're lost in a storm." Laughter and applause erupted around us, but I barely heard it. I was too busy falling in love all over again with the woman who had taken a chance on a stranger, who had seen potential where others saw only failure, who had helped me rebuild not just my career but my entire life. 3 years have passed since that first 10-minute meeting that stretched into hours. Summit Innovations has become an industry leader in sustainable technology. I now lead our development division. Ethan is thriving in school and has a talent for both computers and art, a combination Sophia encourages wholeheartedly. Last month, on the anniversary of that stormy night, I took Sophia back to the old cabin, now renovated but still humble compared to the home we share. As rain once again drummed on the roof, I knelt and asked her to marry me. Ethan, in on the plan, solemnly presented the ring. These additions enhance the emotional journey while